Hello everyone and welcome to the Maxon booth here at NAB 2024. I am your host Matthias Omotola, aka Major VFX on all the social platforms. I'm accompanied by some of the world's leading artists showcasing leading technology like Maxon One, including Substance and the Substance workflow. I have Nicholas here from...
Cool.
Yeah, hey, what's up?
Hey, how's it going?
So just connected, we're going to be showcasing the, what do we got? The Cinema 4D to Substance workflow?
Yeah, we're going to animate some materials as well.
All right. Yeah. We'll let Nick take it from here. Let's give him a round of applause.
Cool. Hey, everyone. Hey, so I'm Nick Sharma, one of the evangelists over on the 3D team at Substance. And what we're going to be covering today is actually animating materials in Cinema 4D. So we're going to be covering how to create some materials, apply them in Cinema 4D, and then make some more bespoke models out of those materials. So starting off, we're actually going to go ahead and go from a starting ground point here. So we're going to go ahead and grab some assets and models. So on the Adobe site, our Creative Cloud Desktop app here, I'm actually going to go to Socket Marketplace and go into 3D. And we've already grabbed a couple of these assets here, but with Substance, you have access to 11,000 different materials, along with over 6,000 different models. So what we're going to do today for this demo is just like a simple vase. We're going to animate different ceramics on that vase, different glazes, cracks, dirt, other like decay and aging to the vase itself. So we're going to go into our models, and here I'm going to go type in a vase and search for a couple of models that we can grab and use for our project. So we've already gone ahead and downloaded these ancient Egyptian vases. I think this is a really good starting point, a really simple asset to kind of understand how to apply and work with these materials. So we're going to go ahead and download those, and we're also going to grab a couple of materials. Over in the Surfaces tab here, if we drop down, we have tons of different materials that you can go ahead and grab and use. Different ceramics, concretes, metals, different paints. So let's start with a couple of different clay materials, maybe some porcelain and some different glazes. So I'm going to search for clay materials here in the search bar. And we've already gone ahead and grabbed a couple, but let's just download a few more just in case. So any of these materials I can click and download onto my computer. What makes Substance assets a little bit more interesting, though, is that all of these materials are parametric. So if you're unfamiliar, what that means is all of the properties about this material, so how it looks, the colors, the roughness, the decay amount, they're all editable in the apps themselves. So we can take in these materials and make variations of them. So let's go ahead and visualize what that looks like. We're going to use Cinema 4D as our starting point. It's going to be like our main hub for our demo today. And let's go ahead and get those vases into the program first. So in Cinema 4D here, I'm going to go ahead and merge objects. I'm going to go into my download folder here. I'm going to grab those vases and bring them in. So that's going to be simple objects that we're going to be working with here. We'll worry about lighting them in a moment, but right now we're going to just use this as a hub. All the content we create, we're going to bring back into Cinema. So our next step is actually making some of those materials, or actually modifying them. So first thing we can do is open our material manager here in Cinema 4D. And for those materials that we downloaded, so some of those clays, those ceramics, those porcelains, with the new Substance integration with Cinema, that actually came out about a couple weeks ago, you can actually just drag and drop these SBS AR materials directly into Cinema 4D itself. So you can click and drag and drop those materials right into Cinema. So that's a brand new feature, again, about 2 or 3 weeks old. And from here, we can click and drag those materials directly onto our vases. So we're going to throw on our render view here to just take a quick look at what that looks like. I'm going to throw Redshift render view on and take a look. That looks pretty good. Obviously, the background's a little bit dark, so let's throw on a dome light just so you can kind of see that a little bit better here. So looks pretty good. Obviously, we have a seam in the middle here. We need to kind of go make some alterations and fix the tiling there. What we can do, though, is let's click on that SBSAR material and take a look at all the properties we can change. I'm going to pause the render view as well, just so we're not kind of hitting our computer too hard in the middle of it. But with all those materials that we were just mentioning, some of the properties we can change, obviously the color of the material itself, but we can change how smooth or rough it is. We can do more effects like the age and the wear of that material as well. So to start off, just to kind of bump up the quality, I'm just going to bump this up to 2048. You can see that some of these materials that go up quite a bit in quality, like 8K, and even for this one, I haven't seen this too much, but 16K in terms of this case for materials. So if you need your camera right up close to some of these materials, you can get incredibly high resolution materials out of these SBSAR materials. But let's bump it up to 2048 to stick with that. And let's just play around with the color for right now, just to kind of see what we can get. When we hit our refresh button here in our render view, we're going to get that material updated live, so we can kind of see the little better quality of that material. And if we get Redshift to actually process that. And if not, we can kind of move on to some other parts of the demo here. So Might be having some issues with Redshift here, so we're just going to hit pause on there, and we'll just kind of work on some other aspects of the demo here while we kind of figure out what might be happening with Redshift. So these materials, we're able to kind of change some of these properties, but sometimes using this viewport down here might be hard to kind of visualize what's actually happening on the material side. So let's go over to Substance, the Substance suite, and we're going to start off with a sampler here. So for those of you unfamiliar, the Substance suite is a set of 5 different programs that Adobe creates. 2 of those programs, Sampler and Designer, are made for creating materials. The Painter app, you can think of that like Photoshop for 3D models. You can take a base model and paint directly on top of it. And then there's Stager, which is a very simple rendering platform, and Modeler, which is a clay sculpting program as well. For this demo, we're going to stick with Sampler and Painter. So we're going to open up a project in Sampler, and we're going to grab and drag that clay material that we had right into Sampler itself. So we're going to work on it a little bit more. So here we have that clay material, exactly as we saw in that vase before in Cinema 4D. But let's go ahead and make some alterations to this. So this clay looks really nice, but let's say maybe for our story and our use case, we want to show some like age and some wear and tear. In Sampler, we have the ability to go into those same properties, so those exact same effects you saw in Cinema 4D, we have the ability to kind of go ahead and make those alterations here. And you can see live like some of those properties we can change. The Sampler viewport's a little bit faster because it's just working on this single material, so it's easier to kind of visualize those changes live, a bit easier there. But everything that you're seeing here, you can do directly in C4D. Those properties for that roughness, for instance, if I go ahead in C4D and I go change that roughness property right here, you're going to get the exact same effect. It's just a little bit quicker to see this in C4D without having to use the render view quite as often. So, along with some of the properties that we have with just the clay, if we go up to add a layer over here, we have tons of different effects that we can use on these materials. So for instance, if we want to add some damage to this material or some other variations, we have stuff like cracks. So we can add that kind of wear and tear and make this material a little bit more unique and bespoke to our projects. So the cracks modifier, for instance, adds this damage here. And over here, all of these properties like the density of the cracks, the depth of the cracks, all these effects, what we can do is we can export them out and then take these materials into C4D. And what's unique about C4D specifically is that this type of stuff, like this crack showing up, we can animate this in Cinema 4D. So what we're going to do is we're going to show our vase kind of getting damaged and aged over time. So we're going to add some of that aging effects into the material itself, so it's ready to be animated when we get into the program. So right now, I like this crack's depth, looks pretty good, and in my head, I'm imagining, okay, I'm going to show this vase maybe like aging, and the cracks are going to grow, and it's going to kind of showcase on that vase itself. So in Sampler, with any of these properties, if you want to animate them in Cinema 4D, or you want the ability to control them in any other programs, what we're going to do is next to every single option is this little pin icon. This pin icon lets you expose the parameter, and what that means is you can take this option and animate it or control it in any 3D program. So Cinema 4D, Blender, Unreal, whatever you might be using, you can take that property and adjust it in your program of choice. Obviously we're using Cinema 4D, and I want to animate that material, so I'm going to expose that parameter because I want to be able to control that effect a little bit later when we get back into Cinema. I'm also going to go ahead and expose this option for the color of the cracks itself. Right now it's set to black, but maybe I kind of want to give a little bit of a warmer tone to the cracks itself. Maybe the material itself kind of gives a nice kind of warmer shadow to this. So I'm going to expose that crack's color so we can actually adjust those cracks, the color of the cracks a little bit later too. We have a ton of other effects here, but for right now, for the sake of this demo, we're just going to keep them fairly simple. We're just going to only work with those 2. Back on the clay as well, I'm going to expose the option to control the color and the roughness of that material as well. And let's take a look at the marks, maybe adjust those marks values as well. Maybe it kind of gets like scratched or touched and used over time. So we're going to add those marks, and we're going to add this worn effect as well. So we have all these abilities exported out. So when we go ahead and export this material, we'll have the control over them in Cinema 4D. But let's take a quick look, and maybe let's add like one more effect in here. So let's say over time we get some dust kind of accumulating onto this material, or maybe on top of that as well, like it's sitting outside or sitting in like a more weathered environment, and we have some moss on this material as well. This moss may be a little bit aggressive, but what's nice is that depending on how these materials are stacked, we can kind of blend multiple effects together. So let's actually change that color of that clay. Let's do a little bit darker clay there, so it looks a little less like skin because it looks a little odd there. But with these materials, when you click on an individual layer, at the top part of this interface here, you should see the option to blend these materials depending on what you have selected. It should be height here, and for instance, the moss height itself, we're able to kind of go ahead and control that anyways. But I'm going to go ahead and export those parameters, maybe export the moss spread and the color as well. That's just giving me options when I get back into Cinema for more control, more effects I can use to kind of create more unique applications here. I'm also going to do the same for my dust here, the color and the intensity, and then maybe the roughness as well. So we're going to keep it there. There's already about like a dozen or so different parameters I've exposed, but I'm not going to go too much more into it. So we have this material. We're going to use this for our vase to kind of show it kind of going from a clean version to a little bit more damaged version. And we're going to go ahead and export this material. The first thing I'm going to do here in Sampler is on the left-hand side, I'm going to go ahead and right-click and rename this. So let's just call this clean to dirty clay. Just so a reminder of like what I have already set up pre-made in this material and what abilities I have to control later on. So now that I have this material named, I'm going to go ahead and export it. And one last thing before I do, depending on your application, maybe you come from a VFX or a games or a film background, you might need different quality or different resolutions of the materials. If you want to visually check what that material might look like in different resolution settings, you can do that up here in the top right-hand corner. So we can go ahead and change that to maybe 1024, or maybe you're working on like maybe a mobile game, so you need less resolutions, maybe 1512, 1512. Can't really see much there, but if we bump this up to even 4K, we can get a lot of that detail back into our material. All of those resolution settings are going to be exported as well, so I have the ability to kind of change those on the fly a little bit later. Obviously, 4K is going to take a little bit more time for it to process here, but when it does, it kind of looks quite a bit better already. And for those of you who are familiar with 3D material workflows and you want to kind of control this per channel, right now we're in the 3D only viewport. If we go up here to this option, we can switch it from our 3D only to 2D only, or we can do a mixed view for 3D and 2D. So for those of you who know what 3D channels are, or for materials, it might be kind of redundant information, but for those of you who are new to materials, materials are kind of comprised of multiple different image maps stacked on top of each other. And these image maps are calling out unique properties and aspects about the material. So for instance, here we have the base color. This is just the color information of that material itself. So it's not including the shadows, not including any of the other like reflective properties. It's just the raw color information about that material. The normal information, the way I like to explain this to students is if you're brand new to this workflow, when you turn normals on for the first time, it looks like the contrast gets punched up. What's actually happening is how light interacts with the surface of that material. So that normal information, it's a little more advanced for some people coming into it for the first time, but it's kind of a very powerful map to get into. Roughness is how matte or glossy a material is. Metallic deals with metallic materials specifically. In this case, we don't have any metallic properties on this material, so we're not seeing anything. And then height is the depth or the height of the texture itself. So if you want your texture to have like ridges and bumps and grooves, that's where this height information is going to come from. And we can kind of see that if I click on the cracks here and I just increase that depth, let's see, it should be popping up here. Maybe it's because I'm at 4K, so let's just bump that down to 2K so it works a little bit faster. Grab some water here very quick while I do that. Cool. But with the cracks set up, if we zoom into this height information, as I increase the crack depth, we're getting some of that crack information to come through in that height map. So you can kind of visualize what's happening either on a 3D level, or if you're familiar with working in a 2D viewport, you're able to kind of go manipulate this even further. And just for demo's sake too, I'm going to add one more effect in here just because maybe I want to punch up that cracks, make it really apparent in the material. We're going to go to normal to height adjustment, and I'm going to add in the ability to kind of control the intensity of the normals here. So maybe that's a little bit too much here on that model, and control the height. So maybe I can set the range and kind of adjust the range of those and the midpoint. So as you can see, as I'm adjusting some of these properties, I'm affecting that grayscale map and punching up or pulling back on how intense some of these effects are being displayed on my material itself. So with all that, we have our material. Let's go ahead and export this out. I'm going to go over here on the right-hand side to export. And we have a couple of options. So if you have the other Substance apps installed, you're able to send this material directly into any of the other Substance apps. But we can export this out as that SBSR material directly. For right now, for the demo's sake, I'm just going to just drop this right onto the desktop just to make it easy for me to find and grab. And what we're going to do is export out as this SBSAR file format. This SBSAR, what it's doing is it's taking all these channels that I have selected here and packaging it into one file. So if you're working before with multiple image maps, instead of dragging and dropping them in one at a time and connecting them to your nodes, especially in Redshift, what you can do is you can just drag and drop this SBSAR, which we demoed at the start, we'll demo again, and have all that information ready to go, just drag and drop. So you don't have to think about trying to connect those image maps individually at a time. This resolution, by the way, we can change this later. You're not locked into it at any given time. We're able to upscale it or descale it when we get into Cinema 4D. Right now, 2048 is pretty good, and it's good for a demo on the floor. So we're just going to go ahead and export this out, and let's go back into Cinema 4D and apply that onto our material. We're going to close out render view here, and we're going to go ahead and grab that material, which should be on my desktop. Let's go to that clean, dirty clay. And just like before, we're going to just click, drag, and drop it right onto our material manager here. And we're going to drag and drop it right onto our vase. And let's actually put it right next to the other one here so you can see a comparison. What we're going to do is we're going to cross our fingers. We're going to hope Redshift is working for us right now. Looks like it's going there. Perfect. So we have our materials in here. Obviously, they're a little bit large. So let's kind of increase the tiling amount a bit. I'm going to go ahead and click on that clean to dirty material here. Let's just tile that maybe 3x3. And let's do the same for our other option here. Let's do 3x3. And let's change our projection mapping type for the floor here to cubic. So we can kind of get rid of that obvious seam in the middle. Probably want cylindrical, but cubic looks like it's doing a pretty good job here. And we'll do the same for the other material. So you can see that the differences that we have between our base material on the left-hand side and our material that we made edits on the right-hand side, fairly stark. That's exactly what we're seeing out of the engine from Sampler. What we need to do to kind of get that height back in, though, we need to go ahead into our render settings, add in the RS object, that Redshift object tag. We're going to go over here to geometry. We're going to override the settings here, apply tessellation and displacement, and that should get us, or start to get us some of that height information back. So you can kind of see it got a little chunky there. We can go dial those settings in just a moment. But if you're looking for that height information from the model itself, you need to go ahead and make sure you add that Redshift target in. So we're going to do the same for this other vase here. We're going to go to Redshift object. Go ahead to override, enable tessellation, enable displacement. We'll go ahead and adjust those parameters in just a moment here. But first, what I want to showcase, if we go back to our material, that clean and dirty one, all those settings that I had before, those cracks, the color of the moss, the color of the clay itself, they're all here. So I can go ahead and change those right in Cinema 4D. So I don't have to go back and forth between Sampler and Cinema 4D. Once you have the settings dialed in the way you want them to in your program of choice, you're able to go ahead and make those adjustments live. So let's just do something fairly obvious here. Let's just crank up that brightness of that vase. Maybe we want to do like a white vase, so maybe it's a clean or newer one. And let's go ahead and lower that moss height, and let's lower that moss spread. So we're getting that clean, kind of more pristine vase back. And for instance here, we can kind of see in our viewport, we're going to hit pause. Let's go and start to animate some of those materials now that we kind of got a good starting point going. So we're going to animate that moss growing on top of our vase here. So right now I'm going to turn the render view off just because, again, processing that over time takes a bit out of it. Plus, just rendering itself is a little bit slower process. So on the show floor, we'll just render this out after the fact. We'll have this uploaded online so everybody can see the final visual quality. But in the viewport, we're still able to see that process here as well. So I'm going to go to this material. And just like with everything else in Cinema 4D, we can go ahead and keyframe any of these parameters and any of these properties. So I'm going to go to keyframe 0. I like the way that this vase looks. It's nice and clean. It is a little cracked, but that's fine. And actually, you know what? We can go ahead and cracks depth. Let's just turn the cracks all the way down so we have our nice clean vase here. And I'm going to go ahead and say I like the clean vase. I'm going to keyframe the clean version of this with the moss and the height and the crack depth at 0. And maybe a little bit fast. We're just going to keep it simple, though. We're just going to go to keyframe 90, so about 3 seconds in. And we're going to go ahead and crank up that moss spread and that moss height. And we should see that start to appear on the viewport. I'm just going to turn that up. So yeah, it should pop up quite a bit there. We can kind of see how much we're getting. And if we want, again, we can go to redshift. Oops, let's go that there. That's right over here. It's hiding from me. If we want to just take a quick little preview before we keyframe that, we can kind of see, maybe that's a little bit too much moss. So let's dial that back down a little bit. Let's just reduce the spread, reduce the height, and maybe too little. So something right in between. Let's just bump that up just a nudge. And a little bit more. Cool. So that's starting to look pretty good, and we're also going to do the same for the cracks. Let's just punch the cracks way up here. Let's just turn the intensity on that. Let's go almost to max there, just so we can kind of see the cracks through that. So again, some of the art direction, we can kind of spend a little bit more time in there, but our main goal is to animate these materials. So at keyframe 90, I'm going to hit the keyframe option here for those more prominent effects. I'm going to pause that render view here, and if we hit play on this, for instance, let's see, in the viewport, might not be editing live, but we can kind of scrub through this here. So at 0, nice and clean. But over time, as we go through our viewport, we should be able to see some of that moss start to grow on that material over time. And just to kind of double check that it's working properly, again, we can pull open our redshift render view here. Whoops, a little aggressive there. Pull up our render view here and just take a look at what it looks like at some moments in our timeline here. So at keyframe 0, we can see that our vase here is pretty new. Maybe it got a little bit damaged over time, like some cracks in that glaze, not too bad. But as we go through maybe like 1 second in, we're starting to see maybe a little bit of that moss coming through, but more so at maybe like 2 seconds in at keyframe 60, that moss is starting to creep up onto the material. And as we go through closer to keyframe 90, that moss is going to spread and grow across our entire vase here. So it's super easy to go ahead and set up your own parameters to kind of have these effects kind of grow and propagate around the model itself. And again, any of those materials that any of those properties that you saw me control in Sampler, those you can export out and kind of adjust and control them live here. So let's pause that. We have a bunch of options. Again, we can kind of go through and control like the growth of this. We can kind of make some more unique animations out of this. We can kind of dial this in over time, but we're going to show one more option on how to kind of make some more bespoke kind of creations using Substance and Cinema 4D. So far we've talked about just drag and dropping a material in. So materials that we find in the Creative Cloud app here, all 11,000 of these materials have those properties already in it. So I can grab any one of these materials, drag and drop in Cinema 4D, and animate them, which is super nice. If we needed to make our own materials, so we talked about that a little bit. So we can pop it into Sampler and create our own materials, our own unique effects, and animate those. So we have a little bit more control that way. If we want the most control, though, we want to make bespoke objects. We want to get down into the details. We want to control the exact placement of these cracks, the colors of them, some of the wear and tear. What we're going to be doing is covering how to use Painter, which is Photoshop for 3D models. So that'll be the last little part of our demo here, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A towards the end. But we're going to go move on to Painter. So Sampler is that platform to make materials. Painter is a platform to apply those materials in a more bespoke way. So previously you kind of saw I just dragged and dropped material onto our model there, and that was kind of it. I didn't have control over the placement of everything. I didn't have control of where those exact cracks could be. Here though in Painter, I do have that ability to do so. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in those 2 vases here. So I'm going to go to New Project. I'm going to go find those models in my download folder here. Double click that, and then I'm just going to set my starting resolution at 2048 here. There's a bunch of options in here. So if you're working in like industrial design or film and you need the exact physical size of material onto a model, you have the ability to use physical size and use specific measurements. So that's good for more precision workflows. There's color management tools in here as well. That's something we can kind of dig into. I'm happy to have a chat with you after the fact and kind of dig into that information. For the sake of our demo, though, we're just going to close those out, leave those on to default, and we're just going to work on talking about the basics of Painter. So I'm going to hit OK, bring that model in. Take a sip right here. And we're going to go ahead and start to paint up our models. So with Painter, I'd like to explain to people coming into it for the first time is this is pretty much Photoshop for 3D models. So if you're familiar with Photoshop, congrats, you're pretty much half of the way there with Painter. So the biggest things to kind of take note of that are a little bit different with Painter compared to Photoshop is, one, we're obviously working in a 3D viewport here, so we have our 3D controls, we have 3D lighting that we can work with, and we have much more unique effects than Photoshop to kind of work with. So we have our materials over here on the left-hand side. We do still have unique masks, so if you're familiar with working with masks in Photoshop, we have the ability to do that as well. All of our filters, like hue saturation, gradients, blur, those are all kind of pulled over from Photoshop. Our brushes as well. You can bring your own Photoshop brushes in. And if you see this little PS logo, that means it's a brush directly from Photoshop itself. So if you have your favorite brushes that you love to use, you can bring your drag and drop your Photoshop brushes into Painter and just use them directly into here. Also, if you have a tablet, it works directly with tablet as well, so pen pressure, all that kind of correlates too. And then we have other effects, like different types of alphas or masks, unique kind of textures that we can apply. There's a bunch of stuff that we're going to get into. We're going to talk about some of the basics on making kind of a more unique vase here. So to start off, I'm going to go ahead and search in my toolbar here for clay materials. And you kind of might notice I don't have all those materials that I had before in Sampler. That's because I just drag and drop them from my download folder right into Sampler. I'm going to do the same here in Painter. So let's just grab, let's grab this ceramic porcelain one. It sounds like a little more interesting. Let's also grab the clay glaze. Let's grab those two and kind of play with them here. So I'm going to drag and drop those two materials on. And when you see over here on the right-hand side, I have those two materials applied onto my model. So I have the clay glaze and I have the porcelain. So let's just do the clay glaze because it's a little bit more visually interesting to see. The porcelain's more subtle. It's very, very nice material, but it's not as kind of visually interesting for the show floor. But if we zoom in here, it looks pretty good. Obviously not as best as we can see. If we go up here though, we can change our texture resolution. So instead of 2K, we can move up to 4K to get much better material quality out of this clay glaze material. And if we increase the tiling as well, we should be able to see it a little bit better visually applied onto my object. So one, we have this material I just dragged and dropped it on. That's fine, but the entire point of this was actually to kind of create more bespoke and unique effects. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use some of those tools that I kind of accumulated from Photoshop, and I can go ahead on this material and add a mask. And just like in Photoshop, if you're familiar with working with masks, if I paint into the mask, I can go ahead and reveal that material underneath it. So with a mask, what I can do is use different tools. Like over here, I have the option to select the different geometry. Let's just do the other way first. I have the ability to go ahead and select geometry of my model itself and reveal it throughout the model. So maybe for this clay glaze, I want the exterior to be this nice kind of cool blue glaze, and the interior of this material, maybe that's where I want the porcelain. So I'm going to turn that porcelain on, and just for the demo's sake, I'm going to change the color of that porcelain. Maybe it's like a nice kind of subtle yellow kind of finish there. So we can have the ability to kind of control the placement of these materials on the model by painting them in using masks. So I'm going to go ahead and add a mask there because I didn't want it on these other objects. I'm going to paint in that porcelain on the exterior side, or the interior side there. Also, let's go ahead and maybe change the tiling of this porcelain, maybe do it by 3, to kind of see some of those ridges there on my material. And on this exterior side, we have this nice, cool clay glaze. So just as before in Sampler and in Cinema 4D, all those controls that we were talking about with those materials, those different parameters, you have the ability to go ahead and control them here in Painter as well. So these SBSAR materials, they're editable in any 3D program. So all those controls, if you transfer them to Unreal, Cinema, Blender, Painter, you have the ability to kind of go ahead and make these changes in any 3D program, which is really, really nice. It also is great if you're working on a team with multiple people. What that means is somebody could be using Cinema and somebody could be using Unreal, and you have the ability to kind of adjust those parameters using the exact same asset, which is nice for consistency's sake. So I'm going to use this lighter blue. It looks a little bit nice. And I'm going to use a more subtle color for the porcelain here. It's might be hard to see, but it looks a little bit better there. And let's go add some unique kind of wear and tear. Like maybe we want to add like some gold kind of like foil or trim to this. Just kind of add some like unique interest to it. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a metallic material or a gold material here and drag and drop that onto my model. So what I could do, this looks super cool, right? The other thing too you might be noticing is that the materials are blending together. So we have this like clay glaze effect on the outside and this gold kind of interacting with the height and the normal information to get this unique effect. That's really cool, but maybe that's not quite what I want. Maybe I want these to be a little bit more distinct and interchangeable. So I can go ahead, I could go into my masks and paint this out, pretty quickly here. I could go and paint this kind of glaze, have it trickle down, but that's going to take way too long. I don't want to go through and just paint out every single edge here. And I want to be able to kind of just manipulate these effects a little bit quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use properties in the mesh itself. And let's also just change this really quickly from UV projection, maybe to triplanar, just kind of get rid of that seam. That looks a lot better already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what's called mesh maps to kind of control some of these properties and give me the option to kind of generate out this gold on top of the material without having to go through and manually paint it individually. So if we take a look up here in our viewport, we're looking at the material setting for our object right now. If we go through these options, you might see some familiar names here: roughness, metallic, color, height, etc. All of these properties that we're seeing here are just like the same properties from Sampler. In Painter, though, because we're dealing with geometry, we have a few other materials that we can work with, like position information, color, thickness. But if we click on this right now, you see that nothing shows up, nothing's happening. In 3D, we might have to bake our models to kind of pull this information out, which is what we're going to be doing now. And for the sake of our demo here, I'm going to just keep it fairly simple. We're just going to go through common settings here, change the output size, maybe to 1024. A little bit lower quality of a bake, but I don't really need that much information or that best information for our live demo. So we're going to go bake this out. And what it's doing is you can kind of think of it like maybe, there's taking high resolution meshes and baking in the information to lower resolution meshes, but it's also giving us information about the model itself, like the thickness of the model, the curvature, the edges, the position information. So it's giving us more than just the high to low resolution bakes. It's giving us information about the physical geometry itself. So you might be asking, that's cool, but what can it actually do for me? If I go into my libraries here and go to those masks, if we take a look at some of these names here, like dirt or cavity rust or concrete edges here, with that information that we just did from that bake, we can use that additional information from the model, so we can kind of visualize that here if we go to position or thickness or curvature. All this information that we got out of that bake, we can reference it using these masks, and if we drag and drop, like maybe this edge is strong, onto my gold here, what it's going to do is it's going to react with the surface, react with the gold, and if I increase the intensity here, we're able to kind of control that amount of the gold that's kind of seeping through the model and have it apply naturally to the object itself. So instead of me having to go through and paint this in by hand one at a time, I can actually use some of these tools to generate out how it's going to be propagated through the model itself. So we're able to get some nice, really beautiful effects out of this. And maybe, this kind of edge where it isn't what we want. Maybe we try something else. Like maybe underneath this clay glaze is the gold and it's been sitting on the ground, and so the ground kind of wore out the bottom of our vase here. If we drag and drop different effects here, it's going to react to our objects and our materials in unique ways, just as it's saying here. So we can kind of read some of these names here and kind of get an idea of what these generators are going to do to your models. So ground dirt, moss, rust, different effects. You can drag and drop any one of these onto our model and start to play with how they interact. So if I go ahead and to our mask here, I'm able to change how that's blending. So we're able to kind of create some more unique bespoke effects here. So we're able to kind of make some cool effects. This looks really, really nice. And actually, you know what? I kind of like this very simplistic effect here. Maybe I'm going to copy and paste this ceramic. Let's do copy and paste on that ceramic. Go ahead and delete the mask itself, just so it's applying here. And actually, let's just apply the mask here. Let's just unmask this vase so it's applied. So we can get our effect applied onto two objects in unique ways. So this is nice. We're starting to get some unique kind of detail of our models. But let's say we want to take this and now we want to add that wear and tear, that damage, that cracks into the model itself. So let's say, in our situation here, we have this nice vase, but we dropped it and now there's cracks across the entire surface of the model. Not great for me, but at least we can kind of make something visually interesting out of it. Over here, we're going to add a new paintbrush layer. And we're going to go into our paintbrush tabs here. And we can go ahead and maybe in the cracks instance, we can go ahead and paint those cracks in by hand. So instead of just drag and drop the material with cracks in it and just being like, all right, that's what I have, I can't really do much with it, I can go ahead in here, I'm going to go into my height information, I'm going to lower that down. I'm going to do one thing here just to kind of visualize this a little bit easier. Let me turn the vision up here. I'll explain this in just a moment. But instead of just kind of letting the program kind of control exactly where the cracks are placed, I can go ahead and paint those cracks in myself. So I can say, okay, maybe I want cracks there, maybe cracks at the top, and it's really damaged. At the very top, I just dropped it right on the head of there. But for whatever reason, like this side is totally fine. We're able to go ahead and paint those effects in, and maybe this edge is a little bit sharp. I can go ahead and still use those same masks that we had before. Maybe get like a softer brush. There it is, basic soft. And let's increase the brush size and lower that opacity down and change it to black value there. And I can start to feather that in. So I can kind of go ahead and art direct and control where I want these effects to be applied and how much I want those effects to be propagated to the model. So you're able to, instead of just letting a drag and drop material dictate exactly what you want out of your model, you can art direct and kind of paint in the exact effects that you want onto the model itself. This is also super cool, but what if I don't want to paint this entire thing. I'm super lazy. I want to have cool bespoke effects, but I don't want to paint it all in. So in our paintbrushes, there's a really unique series of paintbrushes. Whoops, and I don't want to paint bucket. Make a new paintbrush. But in our paintbrushes, if you go and type particles, there's a series, or even in part, there's a series of unique paintbrushes that uses a particle system to kind of generate effects across the surface. So this fracture one, what I'm going to do is you can kind of see here, as I paint along the model, it's going to generate these fractures and crack our model for us. So I'm going to just control that height. Maybe I want the cracks to be fairly deep. It's going to go negative on that value quite a bit. And just for the demo's sake, I'm going to make the thickness just a little bit larger, maybe 0.7, just so it's easy to see. And now when I click on that model and just draw on it, it's going to propagate and crack our model for us. So this is super nice because it creates a particle system and generates out these effects for us across the model itself. And if we want to go through and change some of those properties of that particle system, so like the life of the particles, the speed at which they're going across the surface of the model, some of the other effects, there's a ton of different effects here, like turbulence as well. I can go through and maybe let's just play with some of these values here, just kind of see what those give us. So I'm just going to change the speed, maybe change the particle life so it ends a little bit sooner, and I'll just click and draw and paint that on there. So you're able to go through and paint in through a particle-based way, creating these unique effects to kind of make more bespoke and unique custom assets on your model as well. So multiple different ways, from drag and drop materials in, playing with those parameters, using different masks, painting those in. You have a bunch of different options to go ahead and kind of create these effects. So with kind of noticing on time there, I want to leave a little bit of room open for Q&A. Let's do our final little thing, and let's bring these objects back into Cinema 4D, where we're going to kind of bring everything together. I'm actually going to drop some wood in just on the base here. Actually, the base, kind of looks cool with this gold, but just to kind of showcase some more materials, I'm just going to go ahead to wood here. The wood rough looks okay, so it's going to drag and drop that onto the base. And should be loading up. Maybe not, if we can just stick with the gold. Gold still looks pretty good. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So I'm just going to do the same thing with that wood rough. I'm just going to add a mask in here. We're going to select that base of our stand here, apply that wood material, and we'll tile this in just a second to change some of the looks of it here. It's a little bit chunky. It's a little bit large. That's okay. We're going to make those changes here in just a moment. If I can get that last little bit. There we go. And we're going to go ahead and increase tiling of this. So maybe, let's tile this by 4. And let's also make this a little bit darker here. It looks like we, for some reason, don't have control over the wood color. We can set this up a little bit later, but let's make that more. This is a funky one. So yeah, that's okay. We won't worry about this too much. We're also going to go ahead and reduce the height amount a little bit so it's not as kind of chunky there. So we have our two vases here. They look okay. It looks pretty good. Let's bring those back into Cinema, where we kind of wrap this up, and I'll leave some room open for Q&A. So from here, it's nice and easy to kind of take these materials and bring them back into Cinema. Up here, we have to go to File. We're going to export textures. And in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this out. Again, we're going to select this as a desktop just so it's easy for me to find. Down here in output template, I know I'm going to be using Redshift for my rendering application. If you're using Arnold, for instance, or if you're using a different engine like Blender's engine or Unreal, you can select any of these output templates, and there's even more here. These are just some of the basic ones, but Redshift is right there. That's what I want to use. For file type, I'm going to go ahead and select that SBSAR. Again, that's that kind of package file format with all the channel maps from our materials ready to go. And I'm just going to, for show flow, increase the quality up to that 16-bit color depth there. And it should be exporting desktop. We're good there. We're going to hit export there and wait for it to actually process through those materials. Should be done in just a moment. Hang on with something. But while it's waiting for that last 12%, we can go back into C4D real quick. But what's nice about the models themselves, if you remember from the start of the demo, we got those models from the Substance Asset Library. Those models already have UV maps for us. And so I was using that same model across Cinema 4D and Substance Painter. So what's nice is that I don't need to re-import the model. I don't need to worry about UVs. The UV's already done. So once this finishes exporting out, which should be, I hope anytime soon, doing something weird there. So maybe it's because it's at 4K. It's probably why it's taking a little bit of time there. But once this is done processing out, we'll get that SBSAR material. We can drag and drop it right onto our models in Cinema 4D, and everything that we just done and saw in Painter here, we're able to apply and see in Cinema as well. So let's go ahead and go to my folder here, go to Desktop, and find that SBSAR. I think it's these right there. Drag and drop it. A little bit of a bigger file, looks like about 43 megs, not too bad. Make sure I'm not in the render view there. Cool. And now, because I know my UVs are consistent, I can drag and drop that directly onto our objects. Maybe look a little bit odd. Let's just double check that looks good here. We'll hit play in the render view, and we should be able to see our materials exactly as we had them before applied onto our model there. It looks a little bit bright, but it's kind of adjust that dome lighting itself. Maybe do 0.5 on that exposure level. We can kind of get rid of these other materials. We're going to dial the lighting in a bit, but those materials are here in Cinema. So I wanted to leave a little bit of time for Q&A. We've got about, I think, 9 minutes here. So if there's any questions or anybody wants me to demo something specific, I'm happy to do so. But yeah, just want to leave a little bit of Q&A time for everybody here. Cool. If not, yeah. Also, I don't know if maybe if somebody from Maxon can pass this mic, because I can't hear. Sorry. I heard displacement to normal, and then I couldn't quite hear the rest, just because it's loud on the floor. I don't know if, yeah. Oh, cool. All right, I don't know if that comes through, or if that, I don't know if that works. I was just doing some Q&A, just,
Yeah, I got you.
yeah.
The question is it possible to the displacement map convert to the normal in Painter so we can use it for some game engine model like USD?
Yes.
Just repeat the question.
Oh, yeah, could be it. So the question was, in Painter, is it possible to convert the height map into normal map information for using video games? You can, and let's see if we can go through that. Haven't done that process in a little while, so I'm just trying to remember exactly off the top of my head. I might be blanking on that. Let me get back, if it's possible, I can get back to you on that, because I know it is possible, and actually in most of the other programs here. So I'll showcase this here in Sampler. But if you do normal to height adjustment, or sorry, normal to height or height to normal, you can flip those materials here on the material level. And you can do that in Painter. I think just been a long day, so I haven't been able to kind of quite remember it right in the spot. But per material, if you want to do that, height to normal is a quick switch. And this works both in Sampler and in Designer, which Designer we didn't talk about today, but you can switch those maps fairly quickly there and then convert that information. Yeah, no problem.
Excellent. Any other questions for Nick? Awesome.
Cool.
You're going to be hanging around for a little bit?
I'll be a little bit out. If anybody needs me, I'll also be at the Adobe booth. I'm going to be demoing the Substance Suite over there as well.
Awesome. Excellent. Let's give him another round of applause. Thanks so much. Hang out, folks. In the next 10 minutes, we should have Robin Haddow back for more. She presented yesterday. She'll be back for more today, so stay tuned. Thanks again.